Hello everyone, my name is Jake and this is my channel Wishlist, and I want to talk about one of my favorite Lake Tanganyikan cichlids called the Julidochromis. This specifically is a Julidochromis regani. There are many different kinds of Julidochromis. They are all very similar as far as their behaviors and their care requirements. However, they have different body colorations and patterns. I really love the reganis. They have kind of a luminescence to them, but there's lots of different kinds, and it's really a fish that if you're interested in diving down a deep rabbit hole, you could really get into them and collect all the different kinds. Such a fun fish. But they are Lake Tanganyikan fish. So if you're going to keep these guys, you need to know in general that Lake Tanganyikans generally require, I would say, a moderate level of fish keeping experience. You just need to be able to keep them in a very established tank and a very stable tank. You need to understand water parameters and how to keep those stable. They do come from Lake Tanganyika, which is one of the largest lakes on Earth, and so it has very stable water parameters. Tropical temperatures, 75 to 80, which in Celsius is about 24 to 27. Keep the hardness of the water a little higher, as well as the pH if you can. In my case, I have very soft water out of the tap, very neutral pH once it's sat for a while, and so I have to use some special sand that helps to buffer the water. But if you can do that, that'll help. However, that doesn't work well if you're in a very small tank, because anytime you do the water changes, it's going to swing everything dramatically. Now, I have kept them at one point in a 20 long when it was just them, and they didn't seem to mind that. I'm sure your wild caught fish are going to be a little more sensitive than your captive bred fish, so just keep that in mind. As far as the tank size, since I just mentioned it, as with every fish, you're going to get different behaviors depending on the size of the tank. You'll hear people talk about fish and say, oh, that fish is super aggressive and that fish is not aggressive at all, and they'll be talking about the same fish. And one of the reasons for that is because if you put a semi-aggressive fish in a tiny tank, you're going to get a very aggressive fish. However, these guys are not very aggressive. I have not seen them do anything more than maybe chase some fish away from their territory, possibly in a breeding situation, but I've never seen them act aggressively in the way that I was worried about the health of the other fish around them. But if you can give them a larger tank, you can give them more tank mates. So I would say minimum 20 gallons. I keep them in my 210 gallon tank. They're not the most active and they like to hide. So if you put them by themselves, they might hide a lot on you. So tank mates are ideal. So if you can give them some tank mates in a larger tank, you're just gonna get much cooler behavior and see them act more like they would act in nature. They swim very differently. You'll see them kind of hanging out vertically sometimes on the rocks, on the glass, or on the sides of the aquarium. They are almost snake-like in the way that they move around the tank, which is really fun to watch. Going back to tank mates, most smaller Lake Tanganyikan fish, they're going to do just fine with Leilupi, some Neolamprologus burchardi, or daffodils. You could do some catfish. Multipunctatus is a good one that I have with them. Cichlids is another great fish. This specific Cichlids was fired up while I was making this video, and I thought it was so beautiful. Compressiceps calvus, or possibly any kind of featherfin cichlid could work. If you have a large enough tank and enough hiding places, you may be able to get away keeping them with frontosa. They only get about 5 inches, I would say, maybe 6 inches. The female's a little bit smaller. So you could potentially get away with keeping them with frontosas. They may end up a snack. I've never personally done it. However, I have seen it done on very large tanks, so I know it is possible. But just keep in mind, you need to give them hiding places, and you might need a bigger tank, like an 8-foot tank or something like that. As far as breeding goes, they are sort of reclusive breeders. They're cave spawners, so you probably won't see them breed. What you'll see is just one day you'll see a bunch of babies hopping around. They seem to be good parents from my experience. They actually bred for me in a 4-foot tank with Leilupi and daffodils in there. So I started with 3. Right now I have about 6, because not all the babies survived. So of course, if you're going to breed them, you're going to want them in a species only tank. However, they were able to breed in a community tank, which is pretty cool. Just keep in mind, you're going to need to give them hiding places to be able to do that. I do feed them brine shrimp a lot, which I think constantly keeps them ready to breed. So if you're going to breed them, then you might need to condition them with something like that. If I was going to breed them, I'd probably buy a group of maybe 6 of them and just wait until a pair forms and then remove the other Julies and let them breed and spawn. And like I said, one day you'll probably just see some fry swimming around, at which point you could leave the parents in there because they do seem to be okay with the babies, but once they're ready to breed again, then you might have some problems. So, but you could leave them with them for a while until they're ready to breed again and remove the parents. They seem to eat mostly anything. I am a little bit more careful with my Lake Tanganyikans as far as the types of foods that I give them. I don't give them anything that's just too heavy, like bloodworms. I tend to keep it more to the brine shrimp, to the flakes and pellets. They seem to eat any of that, but I just avoid bloodworms or worms of any kind and just kind of keep the more natural, lighter, high protein foods in their diet. But they seem to eat mostly anything. They are a very hardy fish from my experience. They don't seem to be as sensitive to things as other Lake Tanganyikans. However, as I mentioned, that may depend on whether or not you have a wild-caught variety versus a tank-bred variety. But for the most part, as long as you're not doing massive water changes or cold water changes or something like that, I don't think you're going to have a huge problem keeping them. Just have a little bit of knowledge of what it means to have stable water parameters. But overall, an amazing Lake Tanganyikan fish that I would highly recommend keeping if you are interested in Tanganyikans. And I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you consider keeping some Julidochromis, and I'll see you in the next one. Fwishlist out.